You've spent an entire career fighting fires and rescuing the injured, sick, and dying. But that's all over now. What do you do when the sirens stop, you've hung up your gear, and you walk out of the firehouse for the last time? What do you do with your life when the smoke clears? Welcome back to the When the Smoke Clears podcast. I'm Russell Miles. I'm here with Tony Ben-Cosme. And before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone who has listened to our show so far, and thank everyone who has given us some positive feedback, who has recommended guests, who has shared encouraging words. We really, really appreciate all of the support. And we thank you guys so much. We're very humbled by all the support, and we are looking forward to giving you more episodes. And so with that being said, I'm going to kick it over to Tony, and he's going to tell us a little bit about today's guest.
Thanks a lot, Russ. Yeah, I want to also thank everybody that's been very supportive through this whole process. Thank you very much, and hopefully we can continue giving something you want to listen to. All right, our next guest is someone that I truly respect. I worked for him for a little bit. He's one of the, I wouldn't say founding fathers of our department, but very, very influential in making the Montgomery County Fire Rescue Services what it is today. He was one of the guys that were implemental in the way we do safety as a department, several different things. He's involved a lot of stuff. Our next guest is retired Battalion Chief John Tippett. He did 33 years of service here in Montgomery County, retired in 2009, was part of the USAR team, Task Force, Maryland Task Force 1. Was a station commander at Station 4, 12, 23, and 29. He was really implemental in getting our safety office off the ground, really. He was one of the first individuals to really make safety the forefront of how we do stuff in Montgomery County, which was, at that time, was pretty groundbreaking. And he left Montgomery County and immediately went back to work and was the deputy chief of operations at Charleston, South Carolina Fire Department. He was there for 8.5 years. The last year he finished there was as an interim fire chief, which he retired in 2018. Now, because he's a constant workaholic, he's part of the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, Director of Fire Programs. With further ado, let me introduce someone that's very important to us in Montgomery County, Battalion Chief John Tippett. Thanks for coming, John.
Hey, good day, everybody. Thanks for having me, Tony. It's good to see you, and that's nice to meet Russ. It was our careers were sort of overlapping towards the end of mine, the beginning of his. So it's a real pleasure to be here. The connectivity, I think, between the three of us is threaded through Tony. So that's pretty cool. And I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much for being on with us. I've heard many good things about you from Tony, and whenever your name is brought up amongst some of the more seasoned guys in the department, they have nothing but good things to say. So we're looking forward to talking with you. No pressure.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. So
my reputation.
So we wanted to start with just a little bit of your beginnings, so to speak. So where were you born?
Actually, I'm a native Washingtonian. I was born in Washington, D.C. My mom and dad and a couple generations of my family were native Washington, D.C. folks. My folks migrated out to Rockville, the post office, not the actual city. So I grew up in a place called Randolph Hills, which was started out in 21's area. And then when they opened up a road between Veersmill Village and Randolph Hills, it switched over to 5's area. So I kind of grew up in Kensington's fire district, had a really good upbringing. Went to St. Jude's Elementary School, which is right up the street from Station 21. And kind of grew up in a middle-class neighborhood. My dad worked for the phone company. My mom had been a school teacher until I came along. And I was the beginning of a family of 4 kids. And my mom became stay-at-home, and my dad just worked all to keep shoes on our feet and food in our mouths.
Absolutely. Were you into a lot of sports or active things like that as a kid?
Off and on with the sports, primarily the fire department. From a very, very young age, my parents, pictures, Christmas movies. There's always a fire truck in the picture somewhere. My earliest memory was breaking away from my mom. We were down in Silver Spring, shopping in downtown Silver Spring, and had to be maybe truck 19, I guess. And that day came around the corner, and I broke away from her, ran out the front of the store with her chasing after me. I can still see the guy, whoever it was, tillering, waving as he went by. So it was, I was into the fire service from a very early age. Not sure what I would have done elsewise.
Nice. Did you have anyone in your family who was in the fire service, or you just saw the fire trucks and were just stricken?
It's kind of a neat thing. My grandmother was a huge fire buff, my dad's mom. So we'd go visit them in DC. They lived not far from a fire station. I don't remember which one, but she'd hear the sirens as they came out of the firehouse, and she would just get up from whatever we were doing, whether it was a meal or just having a chat. She would bolt out the door, and my dad, my uncles, and everybody else would go with. They'd go chasing with her. And that sort of was the kind of the beginning. I remember her telling me that as a child, she lived around the corner from a station. And when her dad got home from work, he would take her around the corner and they'd feed the horses apples. So between that and my dad had a couple of buddies that were volunteers at Kensington. So when he was home, there'd be not much going on around the house. He'd take me up to the firehouse and I could climb all over the trucks, talk to the guys at the time. So it just continued, that thread just continued to get woven into a more and more deep desire to get into the job.
Gotcha. Now, did you volunteer at first? Was that your first time riding fire trucks?
Yes. I joined Kensington as soon as I turned 16. And a good friend of mine at the time, Mike Butt, was a member as well. He went on to a career in Howard County. But we were early members of Kensington. And then I went to Wheaton High School, and they had a program called Career Internship. There was one high school cadet program in the county at the time, and that was at Springbrook. But you had to transfer to Springbrook, and Springbrook and Wheaton were pretty significant rivals, so that really wasn't going to happen. So I got into the Career Internship program. And what you were supposed to do with that program was investigate different careers. But every semester, I would just sign back up for the fire department. And my teacher tried to get me to try to get into some other stuff, but I just kept going back to the fire department. So it worked out. It worked out pretty well, I'd have to say.
Gotcha. Now, what year did you join Kensington as a volunteer?
I was 74. And then 76, I turned 18. So for about 6 months, I was an active volunteer. On my afternoons, the career internship, I go to Station 5 with Ed Zbigniewicz, Ziggy. Some folks may remember that name. And Earl Golden was one of Keith Golden's brothers. So the three of us were the cadets. We go to Company 5. Butch Johnson was a station commander there. And he was one of the very early inspirational people in my career. Because I had turned 18, I could ride. So that was a little bit of a benefit. But I can't remember running any calls in the daytime at 5. It was just a quiet place. But early on in our program, when we got to Company 5, Butch sat us down and said, so you guys really want to be in the fire department, right? And yeah, we're just young kids. And he said, well, here, this is going to determine whether you really want to be here or not. And he took us back to the slop room. We got mops and buckets and started cleaning the firehouse. He said, if you really want to be a firefighter, or fireman at the time, this will determine whether you want to do it or not, if you can learn how to sling a mop. So it was a great intro. It sort of leveled the playing field. You sort of had this vision of pulling babies out of burning buildings and all that kind of jazz. Butch made it clear, learn how to swing a mop, clean a bathroom, check a truck. So it was a great balance.
Nice. Yeah. Cool. If you can do that, then you'll really be in for this job. Like if you can clean the firehouse, because we all know how important cleaning is in the firehouse.
Yeah, no, we definitely clean the firehouse, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So do you remember a certain call back then that I guess kind of opened your eyes to what being a firefighter was really like? Like, was there any calls back then that really stuck with you?
Yeah, really early on, there was an explosion in a house in Garrett Park. This guy had decided he wanted to take his life, and he lit the gas stove on fire, or lit the gas stove and laid down next to it. And then after a while, he wasn't feeling any ill effects, so he stuck his head in the oven for a while. Then nothing was still happening, so then he lit either a lighter or a match to see what was going on. And I guess the concentration was just right.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the house had a lot of windows, and the force of the blast primarily went out the windows, but it cracked the foundation of the house. And as we were pulling up, he comes staggering out the front door. It looked like something out of a movie. Clothes were all shredded, hair was all burned. And that was, just one of those very early remembrances. And I just remember all the motion and activity of what was going on. And because I was old enough, I was able to go in and see what was going on. And the house was trashed by the blast. And it was just remarkable that the guy survived. But it sort of, drove home the point that that was pretty real. But as a kid, if there was a fire nearby and my dad was home, and we'd go. I would if I heard sirens, I'd chase them on my bike, try to run them down, follow the water trail, going around the corners. So it was, but the first call that I went on that's the one I remember, the earliest that I remember.
Nice.
All right, cool.
That's intense.
It was. There was a lot going on.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one to add to the memory bank for sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very remarkable.
Yeah. At what point did you transition from the volunteer side to the career side?
Well, fortunately, in '76, I guess it was, the NFPA lowered their hiring standards to 18, and Fred Bagley was the fire chief of Kensington. I got to know him fairly well through the cadet program and being a volunteer there. He was the paid chief. And he sent me a news article that said Montgomery County was accepting applications. And in those days, the corporations were independent. So you were going to work for that volunteer company, but the hiring was all done through Montgomery County. So it was a central testing system. And I still have the article. It's somewhere around here. It's $11,909 a year starting salary.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah.
$11,909. It was
wow.
$272 every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. And he sent me a note through the interdepartment mail, and it said it's time, or something to that effect. So I filled out my application. I was still in high school. This was just like January, I guess. I didn't graduate till June, but I was allowed to go through the process because I was 18, and there wasn't any chance I was not going to make it through high school. I'd done pretty well. And by June, I graduated, and in August, I went to work. I got hired by Kensington. So I just, I just think it's one of those things. I look back on it now and just think how fortunate and blessed and lucky I am.
Okay,
Nice.
so you apply, you go through. So is there an academy, or how does that work for you at that time?
I had Fire One and EMT already, and there was an academy. So I went to Travilla, to where the training academy used to be, and I didn't have to go until Fire Two because I'd already been through Firefighter One. So Stacy Stone, Joe Villela, some of those guys were in my recruit classes. So I went through a volunteer recruit class for Firefighter One. John Scafidi was one of my instructors. John Grover was one of my instructors. And a guy named Bobby Laboito from Howard County was the instructor. And then when I got hired, I went right to work in the station until the class that they hired got to Fire Two. So Montgomery County would host the recruit school, and all the members of the different departments would go into that class. And I got there at Fire Two and went through Fire Two on the career side. Funny story, I had thought I'd worked out well, but I was a little bit behind the curve there. I've been in the firehouse. So first couple of days we get there, I had a big breakfast when I went to work, and I get there and we're running laps, and didn't end very well. Should have known better, but finished fire 2, and then there was a guy named Jerry Murtha who had come down from New York, who was a guy I was in fire 2 with, and then that class graduated, and then we were dispersed to our different stations.
So where did you start Where did you start your career at? What station did you start?
I was my first career assignment was 18 on day work. So
Okay.
I worked at 18 on day work for about a year and a half. Then they opened 25, the little green shack, the temporary station.
Mm-hmm.
I went to 21 when 25 originally opened for about 4 or 5 months, I guess, and then maybe a little bit longer, and then went to 25 on shift work.
Okay, cool. So you did your rookie stuff there? Your rookie, was that a year? Is that what you did, your probationary stuff?
Yep, at 18. That was at 18. So I was in the station for a while, and then when the class opened up, then I went to the academy. First thing that happened, well, after that horrible event during PT, I missed a fire, pretty significant fire, and I was pretty bummed. So I was walking down the hall with my chin dragging on the floor, and Chief Grover walked up and he said, "What's the matter?" I said, "Oh, I'm missing a fire." Because they were piping the radio through the academy.
Right.
And he just threw his arm around me and said, "Kid, you're gonna go to every fire you're supposed to, and you'll miss every one you're not supposed to be attending," or something to that effect.
Right.
So he said, "There'll be more. There'll always be more."
Yeah, it's that's very interesting because you were at the beginning there where we weren't necessarily we're just beginning to be a fire service. We're not truly what would you call us then? Okay, so just a little background. We're the largest combination today. We're the largest combination system in the country, career and volunteer. We have 19 corporations, and we have 37 stations. Roughly at this point today in 2024, we have roughly 1,200 employees, maybe a little more, depending on the month. And we've evolved a lot, but what we don't have, I believe, is a true history of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it's important to reach back to guys like yourself who are telling your stories from a different perspective. When we weren't as big as we are.
Sure.
We're still a combination system. So it's just interesting to hear you talk about the not even really having a true academy, having classes that you were doing, that you did, and then moving over to your station where they finished up basically some of your academy stuff, the things that you would teach being taught, and then a probationary period alongside that. So after you did day work, what was your most, out of all the stations you work, which one's your favorite?
Wow. That's pretty tough because I might hurt some feelings if I if I pick one over the other. I would have to say my time as a captain or a company officer was the most favorite part of my entire career. My drive to get promoted came from, in a lot of cases, missing fires because I was on the ambulance or on the medic unit. And I saw that, my sergeant or my lieutenant never got caught on the ambulance. So that was kind of the beginning of what I really wanted to do. So, you always remember your first of just about anything. So when I made sergeant, I went to Glen Echo and spent 3 years there. Worked with some great guys, Ron Shipley, Rick English, Pat Spivak, Ray Pazernick. Those were the guys that were on the shift with me, and along with some others. Those poor guys had to live through me learning how to be an officer. One of the really neat things was Danny Irvine was the shift lieutenant, and he actually lived up the street from me where I was growing up. And I delivered his newspaper as a kid. So I pestered that poor man to death with questions about the fire department and stuff like that. So it was a pretty remarkable opportunity to be able to spend a little bit of time with him before he retired, and try to pay back a little bit of the grace and the kindness that he showed when I was waking him up from his nap when he was trying to get some sleep before he went on night work. But a good time there. It wasn't a very busy place. But we went to some pretty interesting calls there. Just about everywhere in the career was good. The longest time I spent as a company officer was at 12, was at Hillendale. Worked with some really cool people there. I'm truly having a hard time saying what was my favorite spot.
Okay.
I didn't enjoy being in places that weren't busy.
Right.
But I can't say I was miserable. The cycle was when I got promoted, I would always go from busy to slow, or busier than slow. Never got to work at 8. I would have loved to have a chance to work at 8 for a while. I did a little time off and on there as a battalion chief, floating in and out of there once or twice. I was at one engine for a year as a sergeant with Jim LeMay. That was phenomenal. Bob Linehauser, Mike Preet, Dave Cope, Mark Pebble, Johnny Torrey were all part of the shift there. Keith Grover, John Grover's brother.
Mm-hmm.
And Jimmy Miles was my driver there. That was a memorable time. That was over too fast. I say a year, but it was like 8 months. I transferred from Glen Echo. I did a swap with a guy named Gene Doyle, just recently passed. The system was kind of unique because all the departments were independent, but you could move between departments for your promotions. So
okay.
When I had made the sergeant's list, I went to 9 interviews at 9 different corporations before I got hired by Glen Echo. And I got hired the night before the next exam. There had been a dispute. They wanted to promote somebody that was from Glen Echo, but on a lower category in the list. And the fire board, I guess at the time, decided that they had to go by the list. So the night before the next sergeant's exam, like 1 year and 364 days, I got a phone call that said I got promoted. So that was an interesting time.
So you're going up through your career, and you say you can switch between corporations to promote. What does that look like to promote? I mean, I know it's kind of difficult, that transition from firefighter to master. But for you, what does that testing process kind of look like? And what would you feel like in going? Because not only are you going to a different rank, you're going to a duty station completely. It ain't like one department like we have now where you're interchangeable and you work everywhere. You're going with a whole new set of guys, a whole new group of people, which is not necessarily rare, but for us, it's kind of strange. What was that like? And what does that look like going through the ranks?
Well, there was a central promotional test. So everybody went to the training academy and took the exam. And then it was graded. We didn't have an assessment center. I didn't do any assessment centers until I made battalion chief. Everything prior to that was just a written exam. And then you went on a list. And then you did interviews. So the departments would advertise their positions. So the county would come out with an announcement that said there was a sergeant's opening in Gaithersburg and sergeant's opening in Kensington, Rockville, wherever the corporation location was. So you'd submit a cover letter with a resume, and they would maybe call you for an interview or maybe not. I had an interview in Tacoma Park, and I went for that interview at like 4:00 in the afternoon. And at 10 o'clock the next morning in the mail in Poolesville, I had a letter that said, thanks for the interview, but we've selected another candidate. And it was postmarked actually before I went for my interview. So
they knew who they wanted already.
Yeah, they'd already kind of made up their minds. So and each one was different. So Tacoma Park was a 3-person interview. When I went to Hyattstown for an interview, it looked like the Last Supper table. There must have been 12 people around the room that were asking me questions. So they all had their different things. Went to Bethesda for an interview and had just 3 people at that interview. And the corporations were all different. So Chevy Chase and Bethesda had been all paid since the 1940s. And the other departments varied in their assignments. Kensington, for instance, was predominantly volunteer, all career in the daytime pretty much, and then predominantly volunteer at night. And then it would ebb and flow who would be on shift work depending on volunteer staffing. Damascus was fully volunteer all the way up until, I want to say, after the transition, after 1988. So back to your question, I always thought it was beneficial to go someplace completely new and different with each promotion. gave you a chance to kind of get your feet on the ground. People didn't really know you. And in those days, they really didn't really know you because it was kind of all insulated. People in Kensington knew me, but I had been hired very, very young and then promoted very early. So I think it might have been an even more difficult transition to make rank there because almost everybody in Kensington was older than I was. And sometimes by a pretty significant factor in those days.
Right.
But I went to Glen Echo. Nearly everybody there was, on my shift, was pretty close in age to me. Within maybe a year, 3.
Oh, okay. Cool. So you're in a department now. You're a captain now, and you're at the station. I know this is where I met you. I met you as I've seen you on and off as I was detailed around, but I worked under you when you became a captain, the station commander 23, and that's where I met you and worked under you, and that's where we interacted, and I learned a lot from you. One of the major things that I learned from you, and I think this is where your legacy to me is pretty prominent, is in the safety realm. We're not, to be honest with you, firefighters aren't generally all that safe. We're just mission oriented. Make sure the task is complete at all costs, and even if it causes injury or it's not the safest way to do it, because we can do it just as well just by thinking a little bit and being safe about it and still be able to do it the next day. But that's not the thought process always. And for you, that was always at the forefront of the way you did business when I was at 23. But tell me something about how you started to get into safety and started to really bridge that gap between what we did and what was going on in the future, because you kind of put us on a momentum, on a road to make safety a bigger part of how we did business, as it wasn't at the time.
Well, I appreciate the credit. There was a bunch of people that were like-minded. I think my interest in safety really goes back to my dad. My dad worked for the phone company, like I said, and the phone company was fanatical about safety. They were safety was above all else when it came to the telephone company. And he just kind of instilled that in me. And then when I got in the fire department, there were the people that I seemed to gravitate to were thoughtful people when it came to the risks. There wasn't so much a mindset of just throw your life away. In fact, Carmine Coletto was an early influencer on me as a firefighter. And I can distinctly remember him saying, we don't throw our lives away for dead people. And that just kind of resonated. And at the time, it really struck other people wrong. They sort of, at the kitchen table, he was a little bit of an outcast, but it sort of made sense in a way that, he'd point out if a guy got hurt on a fire, then he missed the next good call. And if that injury didn't result in a positive outcome, like a life saved or something of that nature, he would point to that and say, well, what good did that accomplish? What was good about that? So this guy is sitting home nursing his wounds, and we just went to 2 more fires or a wreck with an extrication or maybe even something funny. But here Joe is sitting home injured and didn't get to be a part of that. So, pick your battles carefully so that you can go to every call that you can get to, because there's an end cycle here to the job. And then it just made more sense to me to be thinking about approaching the job in a way that got me to the next call. I happened to have a good friend of mine who worked in DC that was very intimately involved in a line of duty death. And I can't forget the impact that had on him. How it changed his whole demeanor and his whole outcome. And it was in a fire that didn't result in a life saved. And that, the poor guy is still dead. His family grew up without him. And that business reopened. So, what was his sacrifice worth in the end? Noble, he was doing the job. He went there and did what he was supposed to do, and he didn't intend to lose his life. But, by the same token, the business owner just collected his insurance and reopened. So,
right.
Then the other part of it was it was about that physical and emotional outcomes of those things. We had a guy that had a tooth break off of a saw when he was testing the saw one morning, and it hit him in the eye. and didn't have his safety glasses on, and it pretty much ruined his career. And for at that time a $2 pair of safety glasses, he'd still been on the job. So it just became a matter of when it comes to risk, be able to dominate it. Don't just kind of manage it and see if you can keep the lion in the cage, but just make sure you can control it so you can do what you need to do.
Yeah, no, you used to mention cancer and the risk associated with that way, but we're talking about the 90s. You were talking about this, and I remember there was a time where we were one of the first stations to do this at 23 under, when you were the station commander and my captain on A shift, was we wouldn't put our gear inside the bunk room. And brother, that made, if I could just tell you the drama that created. I mean, I'm a young guy, what you want me to put the gear outside or put the gear in the engine room? It was just some of the older hats that they just didn't like it. They did not like it. And it's funny because now, if you visit a Montgomery County Fire and Rescue station here today, no one has their bunker gear in the bunk room. Yeah. Safety takes a more prominent role. And especially with the gear and the exposure to cancer that we see now, it's a bigger deal than it was even back then. But you were putting the seeds down on the thought process. I mean, I know you're saying you're not the only one that does it, and there was a bunch of people that did that, but it's funny how it takes time for all this stuff to take hold, and you got to start somewhere. Yeah,
I can't recall where I read about the toxins. There was a report that came out about, I want to say Philadelphia and Seattle had done some testing where they cleaned gear and distilled down the water from the cleaning of the gear and all the toxins that were in there, and they found traces of the toxins in their children's and their wives' clothing, because they would take their gear home and wash their gear at home, or their uniforms, their duty uniforms. And it just sort of resonated with me. I had kids at the time, small children. I said, well, gosh, I don't want to bring this stuff home to them. And that became sort of like the impetus for it. Interestingly enough, same thing was implemented in Charleston when I went down there. They still had their gear in the bunk room. And the place where I volunteer now, there's big signs all the way around. And if anybody walks into the living quarters with a turnout gear on, people go mad. I mean, they're looking to call the sheriff and have people arrested for breaking that barrier, which I think is very healthy. So, yeah, it does take time, and I'm glad it caught hold, because I think that's the salvation. Too many, I mean, just about all the guys that I worked with, almost all the guys that I worked with early in my career are all gone. And most of them died of either heart disease or cancer, and some of them died pretty early, like early 60s, mid-60s. They lived hard, but still. No.
How long have you been retired? No.
From Montgomery County, I retired. Retired in 2009, and then I retired from Charleston. 2009, and retired from Charleston in 2018.
Yeah. So you do all these things. We're going to talk about what's something the general public misunderstands about the fire department, you think? I mean, I know you've been basically at all levels, so.
Probably the greatest misunderstanding they have is the value that the fire service brings for the dollar. There's, especially when I, in the experiences I had when we became a consolidated department in Montgomery and then in Charleston, there are a lot of people out there that really complain about the cost of the cost of the fire department, and it's like an insurance policy. You hope you never have to use it, but if you don't have enough of it, things aren't going to have a good outcome. I think a lot of times they underestimate that firefighters are normal people. They have their own little warts and things that are just like any other human being. And I think, that's two of the biggest things, that the value of what we have, because if we're not going to fires, then they think, well, why do we even need one? Or do we need a smaller one? Can we get by? And the last thing you want to do is just get by.
Absolutely. And I don't blame the public for that lack of knowledge, because everybody's involved in their own world, and especially with the fire service, I don't think the public really thinks about us that much until they need us.
Right.
And they probably think, okay, well, why do they need all these people to do these jobs? Like, can't they get away with less? Or like, why do they need all these expensive equipment and fire trucks? But yeah, they just don't know. They don't know all that goes into bringing all these people to the scene to mitigate these emergencies.
Yeah, and I think there's a misunderstanding of, we have portrayed ourselves in a way that is, I would say it's not unfavorable, but it's also misunderstood by people that are business minded and, worried about profit margins and things. I can distinctly remember a couple of stations where it happened, it continued to happen even down in Charleston. So it's not just something that was peculiar to Montgomery County, but the crews would meet, sort of just hang out in the morning in front of the station. And this one guy was he just hated the fact every time he drove past the firehouse, there were just guys hanging out in front of the firehouse. Well, he didn't understand shift rotations. He didn't understand that they had run a number of calls during the day. All he saw was these guys sitting in front of the firehouse, just yucking it up, having a good time. So we sent something out to the troops and said, hey, listen, don't hang out. Don't be sitting on the bumper of the fire truck laughing and cutting up and carrying on. If you want to do that, go out back so the public can't see you. Well, then they got upset. So, well, what are these people doing when they're sleeping when we're out running our midnight calls for lift assist and stuff. So, well, yeah, that's the job. But we have to be respectful because that person is driving past the firehouse is a taxpayer, well connected to the mayor's office or the county executive's office. And they're not calling the fire chief. They're calling the county executive or they're calling the mayor to complain about the lazy firemen or just sitting around doing nothing. So we sort of have to be cognizant of that very thing. We have to demonstrate our value. It's not enough to say, well, we're running into buildings when you're running out. That's just kind of silly in my mind. That's our job. It's what we're supposed to be doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Perception is reality.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, Chief, you got to do all of these things in the fire service. Got to be company officer for a while, and then you promoted to battalion chief. And how many years did you spend as a battalion chief?
I think it was like 5 or 6. Trying to think back now. Oh, actually, yeah, it was 7 years. Yes, almost 7 years as a battalion chief, and that was the hardest transition I think in my entire career. I love the company life. My dream was to be a company officer for the rest of my career, and I'd gotten on a couple of lists and just died on the list because I just enjoyed what I was doing so much. I think that's really where the fire department operates, is at that company officer level. They're probably the most enjoyable part of the job. You have a little bit of independence. If you run a good shift, the chiefs don't bother you. The people kind of like coming to work for you. You get to do cool stuff. I can't deny that going out and helping people. So whatever their need is, it didn't bother me to do a lift assist or go to a 2-alarm fire. It just, the opportunity to go out and help somebody make their day better was the most important thing to do.
Yeah. And when you transition to battalion chief, you're removed from all of that.
Yeah, it definitely becomes an internal focused job. But again, the reward there was being able to watch good people do good work. So if you had good company officers that ran good shifts, when you went to a call, when the call went well, it wasn't as exciting, but it was much more rewarding. It was also scarier than hell at first because it was all those marbles that you had to keep track of. So I worked with a really great battalion chief in Charleston, among the others. I showed up at a fire one night that was not going very well. And when I got in the car, he was a little bit exasperated. I said, "How's it going, Jack?" And he said, "Chief, I'm just trying to put the marbles back in the bag." And that became one of our slogans for how you should operate on the fire ground. So,
Gotcha. So, after doing the battalion chief's job for a while, at what point did you realize, hey, I'm thinking about retirement. I'm thinking about calling this thing quits? When did you really start thinking about retirement?
I dreaded thinking about retirement, to tell you the truth. I knew it was coming. I knew that 33 years and with a couple of years of sick leave, 35 was your max retirement credits. And that there was also a part of me that said, you got to make room for somebody else. That was kind of the impetus to go from captain to battalion chief. I had a pretty significant influence on me say, are you enjoying what you're doing? I said, oh yeah, it's what I just really live for. He said, why don't you give somebody else a chance? And I thought, you know what? It's about the we, not the me. So yeah, get out of the way and let somebody else get all the excitement and enjoyment that you've had or you've experienced. And that, that was the ticket out. And then come retirement time with the drop, I was working part-time for the International Association of Fire Chiefs at the time. Chief Carr had worked out an agreement with them that I was on loan to them. So I had I went from a regular battalion assignment to the battalion safety chief for one shift, and then another shift I was a fill-in for Battalion 3 or wherever they needed to fill in. And then my other time the rest of my time I was loaned to the IFC to do a project called the Near Miss Reporting System. So that was pretty cool. But at the time it was, made that decision to go because that it sort of put a finality to it by saying, the drop was good for 3 years. You just sort of get it in your head that you need to get out of the way and let somebody else move up and take the department to its next level.
Yeah, that's a very unselfish way to think about that.
Yeah, it is.
So when you were retiring, your path is a little different. It's not like when you retired, that was it for you in the fire service. You have alluded that you went on to work for the city of Charleston Fire Department after that. So tell us about that transition, like wrapping up with Montgomery County and then coming on to Charleston.
That was probably one of the more interesting evolutions in my life. When Chief Carr announced that he was going to Charleston, actually after Charleston's tragedy, Chief Carr said, we need to bring those guys up here. We got to help them. And that was him. That was all about the way he looked at the fire service was all about helping others. That's our mission. So at the time I was in the safety office and Charleston officers rotated up back through the department. When Chief Carr made his announcement, he came in from the back of the room, and as he was walking up, he'd always talk to everybody on his way in, and he stopped where I was sitting and he said, I may have a job for you. And I just kind of chuckled and I figured that's what he was saying to everybody all the way up the line. So when he went to Charleston, he called and he said, I'd like you to come down and do a presentation on crew resource management and near miss reporting and that kind of stuff, and let them see this kind of stuff. So I went down there, did a presentation. My flight was canceled for some reason, so I got to spend a night at Central Station. Got back to Montgomery County, and we were just figuring I was going to retire from Montgomery and go to work for the Fire Chiefs Association full time. And he said, he called me and said, what do you think? And I said, well, it's pretty fascinating city, horrible tragedy. It's an amazing place. I really enjoyed coming down there and delivering the presentation. He said, no. I said, what do you think about coming down here to work? I said, I don't know. What do you mean? He said, well, I'm reorganizing the department, and I'd like you to consider coming down in the as the operations deputy. Their structure was the fire chief and 3 assistant chiefs. They didn't have any other administration, uniform administration. So I talked it over with some mentors. I knew I was checking out anyway, and just a pretty significant influence on my career from the Fire Chiefs Association side. When I met with him, he said, why would you not? And again, it was one of those we moments, not a me moment. It's, if Tom Carr is asking you for help, how can you tell him no? So I just told my family that I was moving to Charleston, and didn't really have a lot of discussion about it. It was just, this is what I'm doing. And I retired on a Friday, I think, in Montgomery County, and I went to work in Charleston on the following Monday. So it was about 48 hours of retirement, and that included driving to Charleston. So
So yeah, you decided to retire. Well, you thinking, okay, it's time to make room for someone else. What was your last day like, man? I mean, no, you didn't. You said you didn't spend that much time. I mean, because you was a battalion chief. What was that last day like here in Montgomery County? Because once it's over, it's over. You start a new beginning, like, one door closed, another one's open. That's good. But what was it like to actually leave this department where actually, you started so young, you basically grew up in the fire department?
Oh, yeah, totally. My last day was at 7 in the safety buggy. The shift was relatively quiet. I think I maybe ran 1 or 2 calls, and my hope was that there'd be something significant happen, very memorable, and in typical fashion, it wasn't. So I went to bed that night, slept all night, got up in the morning. The shift was the offgoing shift was leaving, oncoming shift was coming in. Said my goodbyes, gathered up my stuff, got in my car, and drove home.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was to say it was anticlimactic would be an understatement. But I also looked at it as, well, just as the way Chief Grover was. You'll go to everything you're supposed to and not go to anything you're not supposed to. It's the way it was supposed to be. So I think what was probably a whole lot easier for me than some other folks that I know that retired was I already planned that I was leaving. I already knew that I was leaving. And like you said, the next door was open, and it was not a lot of time to think about what had transpired and what was going to. It was almost like going from one shift assignment to the next. Because like I said, I started in Charleston the following Monday. Over time, I got to think, and what was happening in Charleston was a pretty dynamic situation. I can honestly say that my time in Montgomery County was invaluable to helping navigate what was going on there, getting the department back on its feet, helping people, getting discipline re-implemented. When I got there, Chief Carr said, I need you to do 2 things. I need you to get along with the other fire departments because their auto aid agreements were not really in force, and you got to get our house in order. I'll take care of the rest. So my job was basically to be kind of like the vice principal. And because I didn't have any connections down there, he thought that was probably the better way to go. And his other advice was, we had a different officer leadership philosophy in Montgomery. It was get people to go along. He said, here, I can't let you can't get close to anybody here. And you're just gonna have to kind of put the law down. And that's what I need you to do.
Okay. So you're down there now, and you're down in South Carolina, and I remember this, that they had a serious several line of duty deaths there because of the furniture store fire, and they changed everything, right? I mean, they changed the way they ran fires. They changed hose line deployments. They changed what size supply lines they carry. Is that am I correct in? Because that's what some of the things that I read.
Yeah, I think probably one of the few times in American fire service history a fire department was completely eviscerated and then rebuilt itself. They had an outside report, and my recollection is after the tragedy, the police chief was the one that encouraged the mayor to get an outside entity to come in and do the report. I knew a bunch of the people that were on the report team just from my association with the fire chiefs. And when that report was released, we were still up in Montgomery County, the mayor had declared that everything in that report was going to be adopted. So it basically was a roadmap. They already had large diameter hose when I got there. That had already been purchased and put in place. They were still in the throes of getting grants and just in the early stages of everything else that was going on. So it was. And the place was really full of good people. From the outside looking in, you thought they were a completely misfit organization and they couldn't do things. But there were really good firefighters there. They just had not progressed, and it was an honor to work there.
that was a tremendous tragedy, and to see how they were that open to changing basically whatever they needed to change to move forward is very admirable. And I'm really grateful that you got to have a hand in that and helping the men and women there move forward. So when you're down there, that you're obviously helping out with that. So tell us about your time down there. Like I know you said you couldn't really get involved, like get to know people a lot. So tell us about kind of your daily responsibilities and duties down there.
Well, they never had an operations deputy, so it was basically kind of write the job. I mean, there was a job description, but it was basically do the job. Fortunately, there were good ops deputies up in Montgomery that I had come up under and watched and seen evolve. So I had a good feel for what the position required. It was a day work position, but I think most people know Chief Carr ended up being diagnosed with a pretty horrific disease. So there was a combination of helping him do what he needed to do, and then working with the department. Not every day was roses and cherries and chocolates. That's for sure. There was I would say the department was in three groups. There was a group that wanted to go forward with everything that was recommended. There was a group that wasn't really interested in the change. They thought it was a bad day. I mean, the tragedy was horrible, but they didn't think it warranted all the adverse attention they got, and they didn't think the changes that were being demanded of them were necessary. And there was kind of this group in the middle that just they weren't exactly sure where they needed to go, because it was pretty political in the divisive sense. The camps of we need to move forward and we need to stay the same were pretty strong. And my job was to make sure we were accomplishing the goals. One of the challenges was they were under an OSHA mandate to make a significant portion of what was required of them within 36 months. So there were a lot of days, and Chief Carr and I would have these fairly long discussions. We would drive back and forth to work together about we being the senior administration part of the department doesn't have the time to explain everything the way we would like to. My job was to make sure we just got it done. He would take care of the emotional aspect. So there were a lot of people down there that thought I was cold-hearted, and I would kick dogs and take bottles away from babies and stuff like that. It was a function of wanting them to succeed. I drove past the site every day from where I lived to headquarters until we moved to the new building, and I just made a promise to myself that I was going to do everything in my power not to ever let them happen again. My first official. Well, I went to a picnic when I first got down there, and a group of battalion chiefs came up to me and they wanted to know what my intention was, because they heard that Chief Carr had brought me in there to fire all the old guys. And I said, I don't even know how to answer that question, but I can tell you that Chief Carr has told me my job is to make sure everybody does their job. That Monday, if I remember correctly, that Monday was the 18th, was the second anniversary of the fire. And they had a memorial service on the grounds. It was not a beautiful park like it is now. It was just this hard scrabble lot with these PVC crosses with American flags taped to them with duct tape. And I can remember the dad of one of the firefighters, just when the service was over, I could still hear him just wailing, all this for a bunch of goddamn mattresses. And that just resonated with me. I just can't let this happen again. The people I felt the most sorry for were the ones that couldn't come along, that were entrenched. And I got it. They were proud people. They worked for a fire department that they thought was stayed top of the line. And they had a hard time adjusting. So every day in the very beginning, every day was, as Chief Carr used to say, just show them what right looks like. So a lot of disciplinary issues came to my desk. A lot of policies and procedures had to be developed, and I'll be forever grateful in Montgomery because I spent time after transition at the 12th floor working on the initial policy and procedure book under chiefs like Les Adams and Lowell Jackson and Walter Wise and guys like that. So it was a great preparation for, at the time, I didn't realize it, but it was a great preparation for a future.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it was intense, but in a whole different way. Not like you're running calls type of intense, but just helping to steer this organization in a good direction to help everybody move forward.
Yeah, I think the critical element was celebrating the successes. Because of Chief Carr's illness, after a while he wasn't able to get out very much at night. But I would go to every work and fire that I could, and some of the people in the department thought that I was just checking up on them, making book. There were all these stories, these horrific things. I was hiding in the shadows and just watching people fail. But really, it was to show them my support, give them credit where credit was due. I can honestly say in the very beginning, I was very critical because that clock was ticking. It was, you had 3 years.
Yeah, 36 months.
To make all this stuff work. And it was a radical change. But I have just the utmost admiration for them. Those guys, women went through hell, and they worked hard. They worked hard to make things better on their own, and they were willing to learn. But intense is a great way to put it. Yeah.
So you mentioned Chief Carr a lot. He was instrumental in our department for sure. He kind of bridged the gap between us being more of a mom and pop operation to more becoming something a little more fire department nationwide. But what was the illness that he got? Because I know I went to his funeral, but I wasn't 100% sure what exactly he got sick of, and what was that transition for you? Because you ended up being the interim chief after he passed away. Is that correct?
Well, there was another chief that was hired. So
okay.
He was initially diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and the disease was the end state of that was something called multiple system atrophy. So if you think about Parkinson's on a spectrum, you call garden variety Parkinson's, which a lot of people recognize with the shaking and things like that, the loss of facial features. Multiple system atrophy was a disease. The way he described it, it was like he was pushing his thoughts were a basketball, and he was pushing them through a straw. So, for instance, his brain was top shelf all the way to the end. But he said like to reach out to shake somebody's hand as the disease progressed, in his brain, he could see his hand going out to shake somebody, but it was moving in slow motion because the connectivity between the nerves was disintegrating. It was tragic. I mean, a lot of people down there adored him. He was a great salve for their wounds. They never got the benefit from the whole of Chief Carr, but it was life just deals with some really crappy stuff sometimes.
Yeah, unfortunately it does. So eventually you end up being the interim fire chief down there. And I believe you said you did that for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So at what point did you say, all right, now it's time to hang it up down here?
That's an interesting story. So Chief Carr stepped down after his illness. They did a national search, and because of the dynamics in the department at the time, the mayor decided they would do an external search again. They weren't going to entertain any internal candidates. There was a lot of consternation in the department still at that time. So they hired an outside chief again. Her name was Karen Brack. They brought her from the west. She was actually from Georgia originally. So then she took the helm for a few years. There was an interim chief between Chief Carr and Chief Brack. That was Frank Finley. He was the senior deputy. He was the deputy of administration. So he filled the slot till Chief Brack came along. When Chief Brack retired or stepped down, the mayor announced that he was going to take me to the city council as fire chief. The politics of the day and all the other stuff that happened with the job. The morning after he announced that and it showed up in the paper, he called me to his office and said there's thunderclouds on the horizon. So they went through a national search. I went and met with all the city council members. There was controversy about my what people thought about the job that I had done. There were people that were whispering in council members' ears. There were people that had my back politically. There were people that were angry at the mayor because he announced it without talking to them first. In the end, they decided they were going to hire somebody else. I sort of made a decision that if I didn't get the job with everything else that was going on, it was time for, again, a clean slate. The new chief, when they announced the new chief, they asked me to stay, and I thought it was better that I not, so that he could build his own new team and, again, get the department to its next level. If there was so much controversy about what was going on while I was there and what I had done, nothing illegal or unethical or immoral. It was just people weren't happy that I was a disciplinarian. They didn't like the way that stuff had been done. It was funny because the city thought I had way too much of an affinity for the rank and file, and the rank and file thought that I was too much of a business-minded company man. So I guess in the end, I was probably doing what I was supposed to do.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really funny dynamic that these people think this way and the other people think that the complete opposite way. So yeah, you probably landed right where you were supposed to be.
Right.
Yeah. And the foundation was very instrumental in helping Charleston get back on their feet. The MFFF, the National Firefighters, they actually gave us a grant to run our first officer development program. So the model for that came from Montgomery County. So Mark Davis, John Gallo, Paul McNeil, and I had worked on the original officer development program. Mark Davis was the battalion chief. Mark Davis was kind of like the lead for that. And we brought that template down and built it. The city didn't have enough money to pay people to attend overtime. So the foundation provided the department with a grant, and if we gave the template back to them after it was over. So that was the beginning of true organized officer development and leadership down there. And
Wow.
we continued it. We eventually got it to a point where we put the engineers, which was equivalent to as a driver, but the engineer was the backup officer in Charleston. So we eventually got all the officers through officer development because they said, well, I've never been trained to be a captain. I just was promoted to it. So we put every officer through the program. The first class, they had made 17 captains when I got there, and 3 incumbents were assigned to the class. And then we started putting the rest of the officers through, and then got to a point where we would give the officer development program to the newly promoted engineers in their first year, so they were prepared. So we created this environment where you were sort of put into a pipeline before you were thrown to the wolves. So once they completed officer development class, they would ride the front seat with a captain riding behind them for 10 shifts. And then after their first year, then they were eligible to ride the front seat. Prior to that, you could promote to engineer, and your first day as an engineer driver was as a captain. And
Wow.
It was different.
Yeah, it's very similar to what we run now, basically.
So as you are now getting ready to leave the Charleston Fire Department and essentially be done with uniformed service, tell us about that last day as the interim chief, and then you realizing, hey, I'm stepping away from uniformed service.
There was a mix of sort of sadness, but then also relief. There was the last year there was tough. It was tough on my wife. Social media was brutal. It was hard to people came to the office and expressed their thanks, and that was very rewarding, but also very humbling. And then it was time. The turnaround was really short. When I had my final meeting with the mayor, the foundation had been in Charleston. They would come back to Charleston periodically to visit, check in, see how things were going. They had asked my wife what she thought I would be interested in doing after I was done in Charleston. And she said, well, I think it's probably going to be a couple years down the road. They said, well, if anything happens, have them give us a call. So that Monday, I had a meeting with the mayor when he told me I wasn't going to be the chief. And I told him, well, if that was the case, then I was going to step away. I remember that conversation. So when I was walking up the block to go back to my buggy, I got in the car and I called Victor Stagnaro at the foundation, and I asked him if there was, if he was looking for work or looking for somebody. And he said, well, matter of fact, we are. I said, well, I'm your guy. So I said, okay, we'll take about 60 days to, get everything settled and all that kind of stuff. And within a few days, he called back and said, how soon can you be here? So I think within like 2 weeks, I was leaving to come back to Maryland. And for the second time, my wife was left to pack the house up and send it back. Ironically, when I moved to Charleston, my wife and my daughter had to pack the house up because I had to go to Charleston. And then on the way back, my sister and her husband had just moved to Charleston a few months before. So she helped Amy pack the house up in Charleston and move it back to Maryland. So 2 times the most significant moves in my life, and I didn't hardly pack a box. Strong family.
Yeah.
Indeed. So you really didn't have much time to process the fact that you were leaving the uniform service and you're stepping away from life as a firefighter, like, because you pretty much jumped right into working for the MCFRS, right?
Yes. And in a lot of ways, I think that was super beneficial. If it had all come to an end, so abruptly. I had applied for a couple of fire chief's jobs, and I did not apply. During that year as the interim chief, I had 3 opportunities to apply to other jobs for fire chief, and I said no. I think it's going to happen here in Charleston. So I didn't bother putting in. Even though there was a lot of controversy and swirling around, I had a sense that I was still doing a good enough job, and I thought that I had that kind of loyalty to the people that I really enjoyed working with. So when it all came to an end, I did have a moment of reflection there. Well, geez, if that MCFRS job hadn't come along, what would have happened then? We were pretty certain Charleston wasn't going to be a permanent home. We definitely wanted to get back closer to the grandkids, and they had all kind of the kids with kids had kind of migrated sort of back into Maryland. So yeah, I didn't get a whole lot of time to really have any downtime on what was going on. I knew I was going to miss the uniform service, and then when we ended up in Calvert County, the MCFRS has 2 offices, one in Emmitsburg at National Fire Academy and one in Calvert. Calvert County was all volunteer. They were having some staffing issues. I was still passing my 1582 physical. That's the one thing I've kept from Montgomery County all the way through Charleston was I've maintained getting a physical every year, and I wholeheartedly recommend that for everybody, especially with our benefits. And it's made a difference. So I'm at this small volunteer fire department in Calvert County, and I'm part of their evolving system. They're going through some of the things I went through in Montgomery County, but on the career side. So they're kind of struggling with transitioning over to keep pace with their growth and stuff. So it's an interesting evolution. Yeah.
So what exactly do you do for the MCFRS?
So I'm director of fire programs. So there's 2 main divisions in the organization. It's family programs and fire programs. So I oversee the training and education and the line of duty death response, and then the initial research on firefighters that die. Those are the 3 critical elements. So we go out and deliver programs on firefighter safety and survival, but more from the cerebral sense than the actual hands-on drills. We're kind of doing some new and innovative things with critical thinking and how to perform better under stress. And then the line of duty death response is when a death occurs, there's a part of the division that goes to fire departments and offers the foundation's assistance, much in the same way they went to Charleston and other places.
All right. So you're retired. When you wake up now and you look in the mirror, how do you feel about the guy looking back at you?
Where'd the time go? I'm happy. I enjoy what I'm doing. I'm kind of beginning to look forward to retirement. Again, it becomes a function of when is it time to step aside and let somebody else get to do what you did. I see a much older person than I used to.
Yeah.
I don't move as fast as I used to, but I'm glad I took care of myself when I was younger. It's not easy to age. I did develop a blood condition that's like a pre-leukemia type thing, and I have to chalk up the excellent health care that we have and what was instilled in me about taking care of yourself. So I take a chemo drug every day, and everything's stabilized, and I'm just thankful every day that I get up. So when I look at that face in the mirror, I think it's good to be on this side of the mirror. So.
Okay, so that's great. So if you could be remembered for one thing, I know you've been around, you've been doing this for quite a bit. What would that be?
Always tried to do the right thing for the right reasons. Wasn't always understandable to some people I know, and I can't say I got it right all the time, but it was, for lack of a better term, the way I showed care. Chief Carr put it pretty well. The way I show care is not the way a lot of people like to be shown care. So he said my method of operation was kind of tough love, because it's unforgiving when I've seen and experienced things that happen. You don't get a second chance at dying. You don't get a second chance, at things happening. Back in my days at Sandy Spring as a station commander, I would buckle my seatbelt, but it was the last thing I did on the truck, not the first thing. So one day we're running an automatic fire alarm, and we're coming up to the intersection of 108 and 650, and my driver at the time was John Patton. This car is coming down 650 at a really high rate of speed. He didn't think they were going to stop, so he hit the brakes. And right around that time is when I had my arms in my coat, and before I knew it, there's this loud splat. And the next thing I remember is I'm just kind of thrown back in the driver's seat. Birds are twirling around, and I looked over at John, and he's got this look on his face, and he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, let's just go, let's go." And I thought, damn, that was pretty dumb. I wouldn't take the car out of park until the kids were buckled up. I buckled my own seatbelt when I got in the car, but it was the last thing I did on the fire truck. And I thought, damn, that could have been the end. I could have broken my neck. I could have been thrown out of the truck. So it was time to go.
Gotcha. So now looking back on your career, everything that you've experienced and everything that you've gone through, if you had a chance to talk to two groups, to firefighters who are young in the fire service, what would you tell them? And if you had a chance to talk to firefighters who are getting ready to retire soon, what would you tell them?
For the new people coming in, two things: enjoy every day, and remember you're there to help other people. And that includes your coworkers. It's not just about helping Mrs. Smith or whoever that customer is out in the field, but think about the people you're working with. A lot of things are happening inside the firehouses that are just not healthy for human relationships. And for the folks that are within a few years of retirement, make sure you know what you want to do. If you need time to decompress. If you retire and you're having significant regrets or trouble, reach out and call somebody. Don't think that you're suffering alone. There's plenty of people that'd be happy to hear from you. Plenty of people would be happy to talk to you if you think you made a bad decision or you just missed the job so much. And look for some other way to serve, because that's essentially what most of us got in the job to do anyway, was serve. So there's other things out there that may not be as exciting, but they'll be just as rewarding.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Reach out to those who can help and find a new mission.
Yes.
Yeah, you're retired from the fire service, but you're not retired from life. Yeah.
True.
No doubt about it.
Yeah. Well, Chief, we really thank you for taking this time to talk to us. I've really enjoyed hearing you tell the history of the department. I know that for a lot of the younger people listening, they probably have no idea what the department was like back in the day. So I really appreciate you breaking that down for us.
It was a real pleasure. We talked earlier before the recording started about getting a hold of some other people. I think that would be a remarkable thing. I really encourage you to do that. There are some people that have some additional memories of what the county was like before 1988. And there were people, that were in that group. That there had been a recommendation from Montgomery County to have a unified fire service all the way back to the 1930s. So there's a huge history there of things that people can bring to the table. And when you get a chance to tell those stories, sometimes people will say, "Whew, I can't imagine that." Well, yeah, it was for real. And it was good. So, and I appreciate the opportunity to get a chance to talk to you guys. Tony, great to see you, and Russ, great to meet you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And if somebody wanted to contact you, where would they be able to do that? Just to reach out through wanted to pass on an email or something.
Oh, J Tippett, JTIPPETT @firehero.org. That's my NFFF email. That's the one I see more than anything else. And then personal email is jtippett58 @msn.com.
Wonderful.
Okay. Personally, this has been a pleasure for me. Just seeing you again. It's been a while, and I know we say this a lot of time on this podcast. At the end of the show, we do this job, and we do it for our reasons, and we do it to serve, but we give a lot more than we take. And this place gives us a bunch in return. But I always like to say, and I tell people that have done this job for a long time, good job, man. You did good.
Thank you. Well, it was when you called, I immediately was taken back to 23 because that's where we had our most intense interaction. And I say that with all joy because it was a pleasure working with you. We had some great times. It just goes by so fast. So just enjoy every day.
Absolutely.
And it looks like you're doing well too.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're gonna wrap up recording now, but don't sign off just yet. But again, we wanted to say thank you very much. We really appreciate you talking with us, Chief.
Sure.
Take care the next time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the When the Smoke Clears podcast. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on Instagram at When the Smoke Clears podcast, or you can email us at whenthesmokeclears8@gmail.com. That's whenthesmokeclears and the number 8 @gmail.com.